Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sunday School for Misfits. I hope that you're enjoying the series so far. I feel like basically what I'm doing is looking around me at all the great women who I know and being like, will you do one with me? Will you do an episode with me? And so I've done that again today. And I'm recording with Danielle Young, who is just a brilliant person who I grew up in church with. Hi, Danielle. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
No, it's going to be so good. And when I thought about people I wanted to talk to about this whole church girl experience, you were definitely one of the people that I thought I would love to get on, partly because we've had so many good conversations about things. And by good, I mean
Yep,
like completely honest, no
yep,
filter, telling
yep.
the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Nothing
And
but.
so, exactly. And I thought also because because they grew up in the same context, we have a common understanding of the things that we've experienced. But
Mhm.
I also feel like what we've experienced isn't unique to us. And this is something that I think has been coming through for me with all these episodes is people saying to me, this resonates so much. This is exactly what I've
Mm.
experienced. And up until this point, we've spent a lot of time talking about, I guess, how we understand ourselves as women, how we experience womanhood, thinking about our engagement with our bodies or our embrace of our bodies, thinking about the way that the scripture can offer us these really difficult models of womanhood and trying to figure out where we fit into them. And then also thinking about our own experiences of the women around us. But today, one of the things I want us to talk about, I guess the main thing I want us to talk about is the whole idea of women and servanthood and church life and
Mm.
women's labor in the church. And this is something that I think probably it's one of those things that I think we take for granted so much that we don't even think it needs mentioning.
For sure.
But for me, it was when I look back on my church experience, I think about churches now, it's one of the things that I really recognize is like how much churches depend so heavily on women's labor and how different that is to men's, particularly when you have a situation where men occupy paid roles and women are
Mhm.
often doing voluntary work. And the kind of economic consequences of that kind of arrangement for women, especially when you're thinking about women who are not partnered with men and therefore have the benefit of their economic stability. So I want to kind of go all the way back to thinking about this in your story and in mine, and thinking about how did we understand these ideas of servanthood? What impact did they have on us as we thought about our career paths, as we came to make decisions about the kind of jobs we wanted to do? And you were the person who I thought you'd be so great to reflect on this with, because I know you've had some some
So
real
many.
experience of this.
Too many.
So I want to begin first of all by asking you to introduce yourself in the way that you want. That could be to do with what you're like as a person, your family, your work. Like, what do you want the people to know about you at the start of this conversation?
Hmm. Funny enough, of everything I've thought about, my introduction was not one of them. So I'm Danny. I went to the same church as Selena. I spent probably around I believe, yeah, around 20 years there in the same church. My parents are pastors also, so pastors' children. I feel
Yeah,
you.
another dynamic, another
Another
dynamic that adds
dynamic
to this
in the
whole
era.
thing.
Yes, it is indeed. My parents are pastors. They moved to their church when I before I was born, so they've been there as long as I've been alive, which is around 28 years. So I then moved to Australia and I spent about 3 years there. Similarly, I was serving in churches, I guess we could say. And I moved back. I moved to London, then moved back to Birmingham, stayed in Birmingham, love it in Birmingham. All the London people
Yay.
love to throw shade on Birmingham, but they don't realize that there is the whole west of the UK and the Birmingham is a wonderful place to settle.
It's
So,
indeed. But we don't want to
yeah,
encourage them. We don't want to encourage them to come
no.
here because our house prices need to stay where they are.
That's a good point. Don't come. Birmingham is the desert. Stay in London. We don't have Uber Eats or Deliveroo. Promise.
We don't even have public transport. We have to
No
like
public transport.
take a horse and carriage to get from our
Mm-hmm.
little corner of the village to the other
Mm-hmm.
one. And we have a person who drives around to bring us milk because we don't actually have supermarkets.
No,
So
this is
it's so
true.
inconvenient. You should just never ever come here.
Never come. You might see a flour mill if you come, and
people stamping
all
on
sorts of
grapes,
things.
all sorts of things. So you've been around, Danny, and you've had quite a journey, and lots of those decisions, I think, have been driven by, I guess, your sense of finding the kind of work that for you was fulfilling, or that you felt maybe that you were called towards. When you kind of look back to the younger Danny growing up as a pastor's kid in church, what were the kind of expectations that you had in terms of service, the church, what your responsibilities were?
Yeah, so growing up in church and that being all that I knew, I always saw it as church is like the most important. And I grew up with this messaging of, not that anyone ever directly said it to me, but when you're a child, you pick up on the cues, so it's like, I'm seeing this is how my parents are interacting with me, this is how my parents are interacting with church. What I can see is that church is like number one. It is our main priority, and everything about our lives, we bend around church, and we will compromise around church, and this is what we need to do because we are in ministry and people need God, and we're doing so much. So I guess all of our needs, like physical needs, emotional needs, mental needs. I didn't have the words to articulate this at the time, but now I can see that I internalized it as church is supreme. We give everything to that, and then we get by ourselves. But yeah, I guess is that clear?
Yeah. No, I totally know what you mean, and it kind of makes me think about the generational way that gets passed on. So as you say, no one really tells you, although it can happen. I think I probably had both verbal and non-verbal cues, but for me, it ran in my family in the sense that my grandparents, so not all of my grandparents grew up Christians. So on my dad's side, who I knew the best because they were in England when I was growing up, my granddad, for example, became a Christian, and he and my nan both gave like their whole lives to church and their family. So it was like my granddad would be up in the morning on a Sunday, driving the church van, picking up all the kids for Sunday school and all the older people to come to church. He was telling me the other day, even now he sees people who are like big adults in their 50s who are always, he'd say, "Oh, hello, Elder Stone." And because he used to drive them to Sunday school, they're probably
so cute.
so cute. By now they could have been in prison, out of prison, doing whatever, but at least at the start, my granddad was bringing them to Sunday school. And so much of their lives revolved around church, and so much of it was like a real social hub for them as first generation Jamaicans in Britain, trying to figure out their life. Church was like it was the place where a lot of their needs were met, where they were given dignity and respect, and where they could lead in ways that they couldn't lead at work because of the madness of British racism and all that stuff. So I think church, has a special place in Black communities because of that whole thing of new communities trying to make their way in the world. So I look back and I think I kind of understand why they spend hours in church, because actually outside of that, it's just a normal harshness of their life in Britain. But church is like, especially for like those early churches, was like a little mini Jamaica in England.
Like, I love that. Like, I love that. And I think to an extent, even though the UK may have been slightly better, it was probably similar to that when we were growing up in church. And there was this community that was created, even though I think the UK wasn't as hostile as it probably would have been in your grandparents' time. But I definitely remember it feeling like this is our hub, this is our space, this is where we are together, we express our culture. And yeah, like we have community there, we eat there, we worship there, we pray there. There's so many kids around, so many generations around. Like that is something that I do hold quite dearly, like in my memory.
Definitely. And I think I remember growing up with that real sense of, this is actually my community, like these are my people. Like all my best friends were all my church friends, you know what I mean? And it's like
Same.
those are the people who I was like, when I'm doing anything, these are the people I'm calling. Even now, like, even though I've lived in other cities, come back, when it's that Christmas time, it's like, it's my old church friends. I'm still like, okay, let's hang out and catch up. So I think there's something quite beautiful about having the ties to that space, because when I also then think, well, where else is it that as Black British people we actually have spaces like that are not just our blood relatives, but a wider connections to community. So I think that there's something quite beautiful about that. And I guess in that sense, that it makes sense why we'd want to serve that, right? It makes sense why we'd want to build that up and help that to be sustained. But I guess the challenge is, like, at what cost, you know, and who's expected to do the labor to make it work. And I guess that's probably one of my little thoughts. But when you think back to your earliest experiences of being in church, and I guess serving in church, how did you feel about it at the time? I'm thinking back to like the years when we were in youth, running small groups, doing all these youth events.
Doing
like
too much. Doing the most.
I feel like we were both like in it, like all the way up to our neck, just like,
yeah, 100%.
And just all the way up to it, like really, we really were.
I enjoyed it. Like, I can't lie, I enjoyed it.
Me
like
too.
That period of time, like, it was really enjoyable.
It was.
To me, I think I felt like I had responsibility. I like people depended on me.
Yeah.
Did not depend on me, but in my mind, they depended on me.
You were good, Danny. I remember it. You had your clipboard. You was out there just keeping things together, getting rehearsals done, greeting the new. Exactly. You were good on hospitality. You was just like, you had it all together. You really did.
No, I did. And I enjoyed it. Like it, and I think as well, like, it gave us an opportunity to continue to build friendships. And I think that's probably what I found most fun. It was like, I'm doing this with my friends.
Yeah.
And then we're staying out late. Like, my parents don't let me stay out late for no reason, but like, we're serving God. It's outside the church, so we're good. We're good. Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
I was thinking about coming home late, and actually, if you're at church, it's cool. That's the only way that's cool, is if you're at church and you're serving on some team, and therefore you can basically be out as late as you like, within reason.
Yeah.
Within reason.
Gotta find the loopholes in our strict upbringings. How we survive.
Exactly. But you know, I was just thinking as you were saying that, like, how I was thinking about myself in the sense of that I think I enjoyed that so much, and I enjoyed church so much. Like, even when I did work experience, which I think must have been when I was maybe in year 11. Was it only? I've lost track of school years, you know, when you haven't been in school for so long.
I feel like it was year 10.
It couldn't have been, maybe it was year 10. That would make more sense.
Yeah,
I did it at church.
In year 11.
Yeah, I did work experience. I don't think I've ever told anyone this. I don't even think my siblings probably even know or remember this, but I did 2 weeks work experience at our church. It was so cute. You know what the cutest thing about it was? That they'd never had anybody want to do this before, obviously, because it's church, isn't it? It's not really the career path that most people are like, yeah, I want to do work experience here. People want to go to businesses. They want to go to like a corporation. They want to, you know, me, I was like, this is how I say I just wanted to serve Jesus. I said, you know what? I want to do work experience at church, please. And I feel like my teachers must have been like, you with all your potential want to go to church for work experience. But I went and I really loved it, Danny.
I bet, but can we before we talk about that, can you clarify for the people what church it was? Because it wasn't a glitz and glam like Sunday is a concert. It wasn't that type of church. No. Like brick and cement.
Yeah. It wasn't a flashy. It wasn't a flashing lights. It was a Black Pentecostal church. With like polystyrene cups and and instant coffee and patties and dumplings after church and those things. It was very like Black church and just very chilled. But I definitely remember just thinking, I just wanted to know how this thing exists, how this thing was, church, how church was. I wanted to know how it worked. And I remember the lady who was like the ops manager at the time that made this little folder for me. It had my name on it. It was so cute. When I say she took it so seriously, because I'd never had any work experience. And and I went there like for 2 weeks. And I think, I don't remember what I was doing now, probably a few little admin tasks. I think I probably had to like call people up about like some youth event that was happening, or just I go to a few meetings. I remember going to a meeting actually with Bishop Mike Royal. Shout out to Bishop Mike. He was this is such an old memory. And it was like a community meeting about community projects in Birmingham. And he brought me along to this meeting so I could see how it all went and like talk about it with people and talk to people about different ideas. So it was kind of good for me seeing what's happening, not just in the church, but also in community projects. But when I look back, I think actually it was so cute, but also why was that all I was imagining in terms of like work experience? Because there's so many other like places I could have thought, oh, that would be really interesting. But as I say, I was just so into the church space, and I really genuinely loved it. That for me, I wanted to see what that was like, and I didn't want to be a pastor. I didn't want that at all. So I don't know why I even picked that now. It was just probably my instinctive thought was, this is a place I could actually be. But again, it's like that was my community, that was my space. So it felt quite natural.
Yeah, and I think you said this before on the podcast, but like it was probably one of the only spaces where we saw Black women empowered. Like, yes, like they were volunteers and they were carrying the church, a lot of them, but we also saw them speaking. We saw them leading worship. We saw them running women's ministries with like the purple, like, like what is it? It's not even ribbon. What is it? Like the purple.
It's like a handkerchief. Yeah, the chiffon. Like, yeah.
They look good. like, and I think as you grow up, you internalize these images, and as much, and that's why representation is so important, because if you're at school and you can't see any Black teachers and you don't see any Black figures of authority, you're going to look at, where do I see that? That's where I could see myself thriving, because they thrive here. I can see that white men might thrive at school, white women might thrive at primary school, but I don't see them. I don't see me thriving. And maybe on some level, that's what was going on. It's like, where do I feel like I thrive? Where do I feel like I could envision myself coming alive? Where do I feel that sense of safety as well? Because it was community. So possibly something along those lines as to
I think you're probably right,
there.
I think that's really right. And for you, because you've had several experiences of working in churches, how did you come to making those decisions about working in churches at quite a high level, although often as a volunteer, right? Not as a paid staff member.
Yeah, well, yeah, so I was never employed by a church. Like that was not in our world view at all, even though I had seen like my parents give their lives to ministry and give their lives to church. One time my sister had said that she wanted to go on this is the one time I'll reference her in this podcast, I promise, so she don't kill me. But she wanted to take a gap year, and she wanted to work at church for a year. And my parents shut her down. They were like, this is not that. Like, you go to church on Sunday, go get your education, and go to university and live your life. That was not really a thing. It kind of became a thing as we started to connect more. So for those people that aren't familiar, often churches have like, I don't know if they're governing bodies. Like, what would you call like COGIC in AOG? What's the actual word for them?
A denomination.
Yeah, denomination. So as we started to connect more of the denomination, like the denomination is very white. I'm not sure if it still is, but at the time it was quite white. Like the head of the youth arm of our governing denomination, they were white, and their church was white, and their music was white, and their worship was white. So, but they obviously are trying to connect with the churches that associate with the denomination. So as we started to associate more with them, we started seeing a lot more. I wouldn't say they were young people. They were probably like 25. But you know, when you're younger, you just think that 25-year-olds have it all together.
Exactly.
Yeah, as we started to connect a lot more with them and to go to more of their events, go to their like youth leadership training and stuff like that, we started to see, oh, like church is something that I could really be involved in, like proper, like I'm seeing 25-year-olds that work for church, that run the youth ministry, they are in schools and whatnot. And that's kind of where that, I guess, that model of service in church entered.
Mm,
Because it was quite foreign to me then. It was like if someone wanted to be a pastor in church, it was like, wow, you are laying down your life to
yeah.
come and serve here. That was what it was like when we were growing up. So it wasn't glamorized. And I think until we started to engage a lot more with these white evangelical churches that were a
Yes.
bit more like a concert on Sunday and stuff like that. So I wanted to take a gap year out of uni, and like the way that I kind of swindled it was I started uni, and like my uni did a placement year. So it was like I brought forward my placement year. So I did placement year in my second year, placement year. I stopped uni before I had to write any assignments. And like and my thing there was like, okay, I can do 6 months at my parents' church, helping with youth. We didn't have a youth pastor at the time. So that I can help with that there. And I can also then go and do 6 months somewhere else.
Mm,
Maybe I'll go to London, maybe I'll go to, I don't know, I don't know where I was going to go. Like I just thought I'd do 6 months somewhere else where I'll learn, get a different environment, like different perspective, and then come back. And like to be fair, to an extent, I feel like God was in that because I needed to leave. Like at the time, my relationship with my dad was very strained, and a lot of things were starting to break down around me. So I really did have to go somewhere.
well,
Yeah,
at
yeah.
that point, did you know you wanted to be, were you doing this because you thought, I want to work in church? I want to do youth work. Was that what was motivating you?
Well, I did want to do youth work to an extent. Like I really connected with the young people in my parents' church, and I loved them. Like when I see them to this day, I'm like, I love you. I say young people, they were like 2, 3 years younger than me max. Like I'm not like that far forward in years to them, but I just felt such a sense of responsibility for them.
Yes,
And I really
yes.
wanted them to have a similar experience to what I had in youth.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, I wouldn't say like, yeah, I could have seen myself maybe being a youth pastor at that time. Then I thought like I want to learn from people who run really big youth ministries, basically, so we can see where we grow this to. But the two different models of churches, like that wasn't where I was going to learn what our church needed, what my parents' church
mm,
needed for youth ministry. I was going to learn how to run a youth organization, and I didn't
yes.
realize that at the time. So
Mm.
yeah, I did that for 3 years, and while I was in their internship program. So essentially, you pay them a fee, and then they involve you in say whatever stream, if it's worship, if it is youth, if it's community outreach, and you're involved in that say 2.5 times a week, just really building what the church over there needed over there is in Australia, and helping to volunteer and make photocopies, all
Can
the
we
things that
just
intern.
can we
Okay.
please talk about the scam that is church internships? Like, I'm so
Oh
sorry.
no.
Can we just pause here for a moment? Because what you just said to me is that you had to pay
I
to
paid
work for free.
I paid to work for free.
That's what I just heard you say, was that you
I
paid
paid
to
to work
work
for
for
free.
free.
Hmm. Yeah, it's mad.
I
It's
could
mad, but
literally rant about this for ages because I just feel it's such an exploitative way of engaging young people
mm,
who are passionate and enthusiastic. And rather than you do the righteous thing, which is pay them a living wage, you
hmm,
make them pay you money to work for you on an unpaid basis. Like, how is that
hmm,
not? I mean, I'm not going to say slavery because that's not slavery as we know it as people of the African
voluntary
diaspora,
slavery.
but
Yeah,
it's a kind of like, it's a deep exploitation, isn't it, really?
yeah, for sure. And I think like it goes a lot further like than just the paying for it, because it's almost like you're paying for access. You're paying for access to this church. You're paying for access to the chapel services. And it's like, it's almost like you're paying for access to the Holy Spirit, which is weird in that you're paying for access. And it's like, that's what conferences are in a sense, right? But it's like, okay,
Yeah.
I also have to pay for access to go to a conference for work. So that kind of makes sense for me. But I think when it comes to giving 6 months or a year to pay to serve the church, it's kind of weird.
Yeah,
It is
it
very
is.
strange. And then when I
And
got there, go, sir, you go.
I was going to say the other aspect of this, I think also, which I feel very strongly about as an educator, is the ways in which young people get scammed into paying for courses that mean absolutely nothing outside of that church. Like if I could run a
Really sad,
campaign,
man.
if I could run a campaign against church run courses, I would do it. If you're asking someone to pay £200-300, even up to £1,000, you know, for a good course that's going to give them some skills, that's fine. But when you're trying to make people pay 3, 4, £5,000 for a course that you really know doesn't mean anything outside of that denomination, because it's not accredited by any institution that matters in the eyes of the world, that it's not making clear what transferable skills they're developing on this course. It's a scam. It's a scam with a capital S. And if I could like do a survey of the amount of young people who spent money on courses like this or paying to work for churches, Danny, it makes me so sad. It makes me sad.
We need a support group. We need like Christian Courses Anonymous.
It's just it's unethical. It's unethical on a basic level. But it's like people get encouraged to do this stuff for their development. But it's like, if you want to develop people, that's fine. But make sure that it counts. Make sure they've got something for their money, that they can get another job with somewhere else, that people are going to look at and say, we can verify that this is a reputable qualification and it's actually going to help them in their career. But to sell someone a course for money that young people don't have, because you know they're passionate about their faith, it's exploitation.
No, it is. It really is. And I did that. So I did that for 2 years. I was a champ.
No, dude, you were preyed upon. You were enthusiastic, and you were preyed upon by predators, wolves in sheep's clothing, Danielle.
Do you know what though? It's like I got there, and I'm in therapy now. For everyone, well, I didn't say that, but I'm in therapy now, and it's crazy talking to my therapist about this stuff, because she is a Black woman. Like, Black women therapists, we need you.
We love you.
We need you. We need more of you. But there's nothing like
Danny,
them.
I'm telling you, the way mine has been amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine, and it's different and it's necessary. And I would recommend anyone that doesn't get therapy to look into different ways that you could try and access that and find someone who you connect to, like Selina and I. But yeah, when I got there, very soon after, I was in services and I was hearing messages about needing to lay down your life and like surrender to God and let God take the wheel and lead you into sacrifice. So I never thought there was anything wrong with that until I spoke to my therapist about it, and she said, but you left your home country, you paid to do this internship, and then you were told to lay down your life further. Like, what did they want? Blood? Like,
maybe.
like how much more do you actually need to give? Like, of course you want to serve God. Of course you love God. And it was tied together. It was like, your love for God is connected to how much you serve, how much you're willing to give over in service of this big organization that is a church also.
Yes.
You know, rather than to a church, like it's a huge organization with a church arm, you know? So I think, and I think that's how I got sucked into it. Like,
and it's understandable.
And it's like you're hearing examples, like seeds are being sown, and it's like, you might want to study here, you might want to do a second year, you might want to extend your stay, and you're hearing these things continuously, and you're continuously having conversations with other people who are a similar age to you, a similar stage of life, that are like, oh yeah, that message really resonated with me, maybe I need to stay, maybe I need to study here, maybe I need to do a second year. And that was just like the messaging that was going on a lot. So yeah, it was That's how it
Funny.
happens.
I mean, there's
Maybe I was a
so
victim.
much. No, you were not.
Yeah.
Because you know that the way that people will get into your brain and convince you that something that they want is what you want, that's what it sounds like. Like the way that people, and I hear this, and I've heard this so often in church spaces, is the way that like more senior leaders in the church will use all the right language, use prayer ministry times, all those little spaces that we think we're told to believe that this is when we meet with God. But often even in those spaces, the more savvy person, and by savvy I mean scammy person, the wolf-like person who may not actually know they're a wolf, they might actually think they're doing the right thing, by the way, but they know how to use those times. Like I'll never forget when I was at Bible college once, and I must have been in the second year of my time there. And it was a time when everybody was thinking about what they were going to do next. And so there will be a few leaders who you'd see like come and do talks every now and then. And they started to kind of hover around a bit like vultures to try to see who they could get to come to their church or help with their ministry stuff. And there was a guy there who ran a church somewhere near around Birmingham side. It's not in Birmingham, but maybe somewhere nearby. And he prayed for me and gave me this word. This is why these
For the
days
people
I'm
that are
just
listening.
like, this is why I'm just like, don't give me a prophecy. Just tell me what you want. Do you know?
Keep it to yourself.
Just tell me what you want or not. But don't mix it up with prophecy and everything else. And he had a word that he had a picture of me washing the feet of this man of God.
Screaming. I'm screaming.
Serving this man of God in their ministry and all this kind of stuff. And I said, and now that I look back, and the thing is, at the time, you're thinking, okay, but you know why I love the Holy Spirit, you know, is because the Holy Spirit sees through all scams. And I remember hearing him say this and thinking, I'm going to ponder this a little bit. And somehow between me saying I'm going to ponder it never carried on. I remember a little bit thinking, maybe it might be this person, or maybe it might be this person. Maybe it was actually something God was giving to me as a kind of sense of direction. But actually, that wasn't what was happening in my life at the time. I went back to Birmingham. My mum was ill, and I was her carer for a year. Do you know, that's actually what happened next. It was actually as it should have been. It was appropriate. It was good that I did that. But this whole idea of me serving a person, and it was because it was him, because then a couple of weeks afterwards he then wants to talk to me about potentially coming to serve at his church.
Too much.
And I was like, I don't really think so, because my spirit didn't take to him. So I was like, this isn't really going to happen. But it was one of those things where it's like, if I don't know enough, if I don't have that connectivity, and it's not even a knowing enough, it's like, if I haven't experienced this enough yet, I will get drawn into you thinking I now need to give up my life and go to work at your church for free, when really you just want some free workers.
It's true.
But you've tied this up with, a prophetic word and a prayer time. And that's where it gets manipulative, because I'm like, you have to be able to check yourself. Like in any interaction with someone as a leader, you have to be able to check what your motives are, where your agenda might be corrupting what you're saying is spiritual and of God, because I think that's where the boundaries just get very messy, man.
100%. And I think that you're a lucky one, because you were able to, I guess, discern that isn't right for me. But in that space, it's hard for people that haven't been in it. But when you respond to an altar call or to something, it's like you're opening your heart for a change. So you are vulnerable in that. It's like you're soft, you're vulnerable. And you believe you're opening your heart to God. And a lot of the time, the people who are preaching, people who are praying, are set up as like God's representatives. And it's difficult if you haven't been in that environment. But I think a lot of the time, it's like, I felt like what they were saying to me was what God was saying to me.
Exactly.
And it's like, and this is something that like only in the past couple of years have I really, and it's crazy because I grew up in a pastor's house, so I knew pastors weren't perfect, and I knew that they were not God's representatives all of the time. Maybe on Sundays, but not all of the time. But I think for me, I had this innate belief that they were right and I was wrong, and what they were saying was correct and what I was thinking and believing needed to shift into what they
Yes.
wanted. So it
Yes.
was super manipulative. And I think that whole kind of setup just like primes people, like young people, impressionable people, for further manipulation and exploitation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's very sad. Like as much as we laugh about it, it is actually quite dark and quite sad.
Yeah. No, you're
We do
right.
need a support group.
And I wonder whether we're laughing as like triggered, traumatized people, or whether
Definitely,
like
yeah.
probably a combination of things that make us laugh, because it's people's whole lives get impacted by this stuff in really quite damaging ways, and we can, I guess, have a sense of humor about it. And I wonder whether, because we process some of this now and we're able to talk about it with a little bit of distance, we're
Mm.
gonna have a bit of a laugh. But for so some people listening to this or watching this stuff can be really very raw. It can be really
Mm-hmm.
very raw, and it also makes me wonder whether there's an additional dynamic of this for women, for Black women especially in white evangelical space. Like you talked about the difference for you in going to Australia, being in a different context, and I feel like I've definitely seen this kind of expectation around women's servanthood to be really enhanced in white evangelical spaces. And it's always funny to me when people make comments about assuming that in a kind of white cultures, women are more respected, and in like, you know, Black cultures or Asian cultures, it's a lot more I guess traditional or repressive of women. That's not been my experience. Like, I grew up seeing women pastors and preaching all the
Mm-hmm.
time, and in white evangelical spaces, as I've come to understand them, there often is like an ongoing gender issue where women can't even do those things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're only really seen as the kind of the wife of the pastor who leads, who's a man. And there isn't really, but they're expected to work for free, and lots of women are expected to work for free. And I wonder whether for you, who's occupied both Black Pentecostal spaces and white evangelical spaces, have you seen a difference in terms of how that servanthood stuff is linked to gender or race in your own experience, or do you think it's quite similar?
Yeah, it comes back to intersectionality. So that is when you have, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, multiple marginalized identities like converging upon each other. So I'm not
Yes.
just Black, I'm a Black woman. And
Yes.
in that, so yes, in Black Pentecostal churches, women were doing a lot. Women were doing the most and getting a lot and getting very little recognition for it, or say they were like unpaid and whatnot. However, there was still that race, like they didn't have to
Yeah, yeah,
contend with
yeah.
the race thing. But
Yes.
in these white settings, similarly, women, you may have had one, I think I probably saw one or two women preach in my first year there, and the rest of them were men. And then, like, as the years started to progress, a few more women started to preach in various settings. Um, but I think it, like in my own experience, it does go back to that sense of representation, because I think I possibly felt very low on the hierarchical scale.
Mm,
So even though I was serving so much and even though I was giving a lot, it was like I wasn't a man, I wasn't a white man, so I didn't have that going for me. Nor did I have like in terms of needing respect or expecting respect.
yes.
I never expected respect because I was a Black woman. Whereas I think white men probably always walk in that and expect that. And then white women, it's like they have the potential to be with a white man. Australia is not like that. Like if white men want you in Australia, it might not be a good sign. So that's what I'll say on that. Um, but yeah, I never saw myself as deserving of respect in that setting, because everyone that had respect was white,
Mm,
and the people that were most respected were white men. So it was like, sure, I'll do as much grunt work as you need me to do.
mm,
Similarly, everyone else was doing grunt work as well, but I just thought this is my lot in life. Like, this is what
mm.
I am supposed to do. I'm supposed to be running around after you. I'm supposed to be running myself into the ground. And it's no one had said that to me directly, but I had internalized that just based on what
Yes.
I had seen. Like, these are the people that get honor. These are the people that get respect. These are the people that have their time protected. People like me don't. I
Yes.
am the only one here. Like, there is no one else like me,
Yeah.
actually. There's no
Yeah.
Black women a few of them came a bit later. But especially in that first few years, like I was the only one there. So I just thought, yeah, this is like what I deserve, and I'm not deserving of anything more than that. Whereas I think maybe I could see in some of my white peers, they were a bit more like, this is wrong. Why should I be doing this? And I never had a sense of that,
Yeah.
which is problematic.
Mm, mm, mm. It's so interesting. So interesting. And you use the word honor there, which I feel like is a trigger trigger
We need a new
word
podcast
for
for that one.
how so many of these like cultures, but I will call them spiritually abusive cultures operate, is with this honor culture, which often ends up being a way of reinforcing hierarchies of power within these spaces,
Mm-hmm.
because you add a kind of theology for why you should be showing respect to white men in such a
Mm-hmm.
context predominantly. And maybe the wife of the white man in charge, if she also might have some leadership stuff about her, she might be preaching too, or might be a joint senior leader, she deserves honor. And then it kind of cascades down the hierarchy to people like us.
Mm.
And it kind of and that for me, like when I've been in spaces where that's been talked about as like one of the main cornerstones of a church or a community. On of the surface, it sounds really nice because you immediately think, oh, this is like a mutual honor thing where actually we both respect one another and we both care for one, we both respect each other's stories, honor one another's truths. You think this sounds perfect, right? But what it tends to be is a very hierarchical understanding of honor that just ends up making things even worse than they've been, because now there's a whole rationale for why things should be this way. And in
Mm-hmm.
my experience, what it tends to then do is silence any kind of critical conversation that is not about
Exactly.
criticism. That's about saying, how is this actually going and working in practice? Is this okay?
Mm.
Should we be, why are we doing it this way? Is this the best we can do? Like those kinds of conversations can't be had unless they're being had by the people at the top of the hierarchy. So honor culture
100%.
becomes a silence culture, really, because if you
Mm-hmm.
even speak up about anything, then you're seen as breaking the cultural expectations, which then
Mm.
leads to you being pushed even further to the edges.
Mm. Yeah, and actually that's when it collapsed for me. It's like I was in this house of cards, and even though I had moved back to the UK around the time that after George Floyd was murdered in the US, I was reflecting upon some of my experiences that I had had
Mm.
in this church, and the times I had racist things said about me, the times that I had heard racist things said about other leaders in their church by leaders in
Wow.
their church, the times that I had sat in college classes and just heard senior leaders in the church say flat out racist things, and then so all of this stuff was circulating, and I still thought very highly of them. So I wanted to let them know, like, hey, this could be really like they were going to do a service, I think a midweek service about it because that was on trend at the time in churches, to address the elephant in the room, basically. And I had said, like, I think it's awesome that you're going to do this. Like, it would be great, if this could be a time where you could, like, people in your church are so soft-hearted. So I thought that, like, they will be able to look introspectively at this time and address any like racist ideologies that they have. Like,
Yeah.
I experienced racism when I was there, and like it was difficult for me, but like I think if you're drawing attention to this, you might want to think about this, and this. But like I think it was great that you want to do it, basically. That was when I realized that I am not the one to challenge them. They can challenge me all they want to about whatever issues
Yes.
they might think I have going on in my life. But the response that I got was pretty much like, hi, I'll pass this on to the team that are running the service. Sorry to hear you experienced racism. Glad to know that no one else did here, basically. Like, bye bye. And that is when it all
Wow.
crumbled for me because I realized, okay, what I give to them isn't afforded to me. They had told me they love me. They had told me that God sees me and God values me and they see me and they value me, but it was like that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I had realized, okay, no, they are not here for me as a Black woman. We are
Yeah.
not the same. You and your white male friends are at the top, protecting this institution that you have built against
Yes.
any form of threat. And I have told you, essentially, to go back to the buzzword, that I have been dishonored in the church, and I have heard other Black people be dishonored in the church. I have heard your pastors dishonor entire people groups of people in my college that I am paying for, like, but you do not care. And I think that's when it broke down for me. But yeah, I think, like, you spot on, Sal, like, with the implications of what that honor culture does. And it comes from that scripture that talks about, if you receive a prophet as a prophet, you get a prophet's reward. But like, we don't have prophets today. Sorry if I'm allowed to say it. I don't believe we have prophets today like we had them in the Old Testament. That is not my personal belief. So
I love how you just dropped that and it was like, hold on a minute, can I say that on this thing?
I don't know. Maybe edit that part out if you want to. I won't take any offense.
Offense is another one that gets used, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Having a hard heart.
Yeah, if you're somebody who this is the way that I just, when these places are mad now. When I look back on these places now, I just think it's crazy. Like, this is another thing that became really popular, was blaming people for being hurt by your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Like gaslighting to the extreme. This whole like church emphasis on not being offended.
Mm-hmm.
That was basically like, there was a whole book about this, wasn't there? It's called The Bait of Satan.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically how, if you're somebody who's been offended, then you were basically the problem, because you're allowing Satan to like set up camp in your life by being hurt.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you should basically just get over it and keep on serving and being there and being there with people, even if you're offended. And this became basically, I mean, it sounded like a kind of whole logic for having dishonest relationships that didn't have any integrity.
Mm-hmm.
It also just was completely against what the scriptures actually say about, if you are going to offer your offering at the altar and you know you've hurt someone, before you go and bring your offering, go and make it right with that person. It doesn't say if the person's hurt, they should be the one to come to you. It says, if you know you've hurt someone, you need to go and make it right. But this whole book was basically gaslighting people who've been offended or hurt, normally by church leaders. I feel like it was really talking about church leaders.
Yeah.
And in order to kind of say you're the problem, you know. So in the case where you've experienced racism at the hands of your leaders, you're not, it's you are the problem. If you're offended by it, you are the problem. If you keep a note of this, if you raise this as an issue, if you challenge them on this, you are moving in the spirit of offense, and you therefore need to get over yourself. And it was such a wild
It's crazy
way
you
of saying it, isn't it? Like, at the time I read it and I thought, okay, I can see why being offended can break down relationships for sure. But if you're a racist person, I'm not going to pretend to be okay with that, because I don't think that's true in any way, shape, or form. I don't think that's honest. I don't think that's even human.
But I think you have a very healthy sense of self, Selina.
I do now. Like, at the time,
yeah.
I didn't before, I think.
At the time, I didn't either. So when these things were said about me, when these things were said to me, my thing was, don't take offense. Like, let it roll up your back, forgive them, and still uphold them in their position of respect and honor above your life. So I was like quick to forgive, you know. And I did. This is the thing, like, I really did forgive. I shouldn't do inverted commas, because I really did. These people, I stayed with these people, like, in spite of all of these things that were happening. And this is, like, as you're talking, I'm like, man, they have really done the most to protect their institutions and to protect their hierarchies of power. They have done the most. They have released books to keep people in traps. They have
it's clever.
released sermons after sermons after sermons, and it's like they have set themselves up as like God's anointed in your life and in this church. So no one's going to say anything contrary to it, because not only are they God's anointed, God has also told them to write this book about X. Yes. So that is really important. And then the favor of God was on it, and it got published, and then it became a bestseller. And like because you all bought it. Like, you
exactly. You told the thousands of Christians you have authority over to buy the book. That's why it's a bestseller.
For the book, like, that's how it became a bestseller, you know. So like they've done so much to keep people, again, guess, yeah, enslaved and ensnared in their minds. And like, to think about my own journey, like, to the point when I started questioning them, I started questioning, can I even be a Christian? Because I'm going against that. So I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm still a Christian because I'm going against these people.
Yeah.
And that is the extent of the manipulation and the way that it is so twisted and convoluted, and it's like
Mm.
embedded into your mind and your spirit, that you're like, if I disagree with you, like, can I still have faith? And
Yeah.
yeah,
It's so deep, Danny, you know, but it's
so deep.
because I think that often we think that our own spirituality can somehow exist outside of social influence. But when you're in a church, a church culture, it becomes deeply intertwined with your own spirituality.
Yeah.
And what they're promoting, the messages that they're giving out, start to shape your own sense of who God is, your own sense of who you are, the sense of what you're capable of in the world. And that
Mm-hmm.
process of unraveling that intertwining, that process of trying to separate out what is actually manipulation by spiritual leaders who should have known better, and what is actually my actual genuine faith, where is God in the midst of this, like, that takes time, that takes a process. And I think it's
Difficult.
partly why I feel like this podcast matters in my heart. At least the what drives me is that sense of I've had to do this, and I guess to some extent I'm still doing this. It's kind of trying to figure out, and trying to figure out what should we be keeping. Like, if sometimes our own faith, our own spirituality has been so corrupted by bad intent, by manipulative people, and also corrupted by people who maybe were doing their best, but it just wasn't good enough for us. Like, they did their
Yeah.
best, and I don't have any hard feelings against them, but actually what they've passed on, some of it's been really unhelpful and counterproductive. And that
Mm-hmm.
process is so difficult. What's helped you in the process of like recovering from this experience, processing it? I know you're in the middle of the processing, so I don't speak as if you've ended, but what's helped you to find, I want to say, healing? You might not feel like you're healed yet. Like, what has that been like for you, the kind of aftermath?
Um, I think definitely being in therapy. I would not be here where I am right now if I wasn't in therapy, because I needed someone outside of this context, not a
Mm,
pastor, like a qualified psychotherapist, to help me
yes.
to unpack a lot of this stuff.
Is your therapist a
Um,
Christian?
she is a Christian, yeah. I think she's a Christian. Um, I'm not sure like what strand of Christianity she follows, but she has that base,
Mm,
that understanding. So it's not like I had to
yeah.
explain those things to her. Is
It's
yours?
really helpful because mine isn't. And actually, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
seeing her anymore because we got to a point where she was like, you don't have to keep coming to therapy. Like, I know you like to do your due diligence, but you've had as much as
Very
you need.
responsible.
You're basically self-caring right now. So like, you
Mm-hmm.
don't need to be here basically. But I deliberately didn't choose a Christian therapist because I was afraid that a Christian therapist would spiritualize things that I was talking through, and I needed
Yeah.
somebody to just see me as a person and just
Mm-hmm.
give me that kind of basic human, emotional, mental psychotherapy, psycho therapeutical, that's a long word, support.
Mm-hmm.
And I was worried that a Christian therapist was going to be trying to give me doctrine and trying to give me scriptures when I needed somebody to just get to the grips of what was happening for me emotionally. Although I know that's not what therapists do when they're actually in their professional bag. Do you know what I mean? But that was what I thought would happen. But
No,
I
I've
do
had that happen
agree
to me
that,
before
oh,
in
have
therapy
you?
when I
Okay.
was trying therapists. Like, my mom was just sending
Yeah.
me scriptures, and I was like, "Do you
It's
you
like,
don't
no.
understand that I know
Listen, we've
this?"
been memorizing them for since we were able to memorize anything. So
Yeah.
that's not what we need right now.
No.
I totally agree. But I agree that it can be so helpful for
Yeah.
processing. But I think my therapist didn't understand why I even had the expectations that I had about
Mm.
life and my decision making processes. It was like, why would you, do you know what I mean? Why would you
Why
think
do you think
that?
that's normal? Yeah.
But go on, therapy's been good.
Yeah, it's definitely therapy. And I honestly think, so I'm holding on to like a semblance of my faith still. So I wouldn't say that I am like I believe in God. I can't deny that. For me to deny that would be to say, like, I don't think gravity is real. Like, I really
Yes,
do believe that
yes.
God is real. And I believe that He's been very real for me in my life.
Mm.
Like, I believe in Jesus. I believe that He came and that He died and He rose again. Beyond that, everything is on the table for
Yes,
questioning.
yes, yeah.
Everything. And I think that is honestly probably the only way I'm still holding on to my faith, because
Mm.
as me and my therapist started to unpack a lot of the things that were affecting me still to this day in my work to this day and in my relationships and in my friendships and in the way that I see and perceive myself, I had realized that so much of scripture had been used to keep me in this mental entrapment. So I was like, I can't trust it. Like
I
it
get it.
sounds super cynical, but I was like, I can't trust it. I can't trust
Yeah.
anything. I don't
Mm.
know what it says. I don't know what I think about it.
Yeah.
If when I'm hearing it through these voices of these white men and these white women that wanted me to serve them at all costs and to
Yeah.
serve their church at all costs. So I don't know anymore. That and like a few other like in therapy, unpacking a lot of what I had gone through in my childhood and in my teenage years, I just realized that I think that's the only thing I can hold on to in my faith right now. Beyond that, like as and when it comes up, we will talk about it and I will
Yeah.
process that. Do you know? Like, and this
For
is what
real.
when you're talking
Yeah.
about needing to do that work, I'm like, it is really difficult. Like, and I don't have
Mm.
a lot of energy to do it. like honestly, and it sounds really bad,
Yeah.
but I'm not a theologian. I'm not. This is why this podcast is so important, because I don't have all of the tools. I don't know which books to read. I don't have that information like close to hand, or and
Mm.
I don't want to search for it. I feel like I've lost so much in my
Yeah,
life
yeah,
and I've
yeah, yeah,
given up so
yeah.
much time that I really just want to live right now. And
Yeah, Danny.
I believe in, I guess, basic fundamentals of our faith, not what any course tells you is the fundamentals of our faith, but like God is real, Jesus came and He rose again. That, and I wholeheartedly believe in that, and I do believe that He loves us. Like what that looks like, I'm not 100% sure. But it is difficult work. It is hard work, and I think this podcast is amazing because you're helping to give language and to put so many things in perspective that I can't do. Like I can't do. I don't. I'm tired. Like I also don't want to do it for myself right now.
Mm.
I really just want to live, and I think that
Yeah.
your podcast has been so helpful for me in telling me that I'm not crazy and in showing me that I can still believe in God and not agree with X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Like that is okay. That's okay,
Yeah.
and that's really significant for me.
It's so good to hear, Danny. And I hear that because I feel like every time I sit down to record, I think how crazy is it that I'm here, because like when I was in my worst moments, when I lost my faith entirely, I would say I was like, I would never again talk about God to anyone. Like I said this numerous times. I was like, I'm not telling anyone about this. I'm not encouraging anyone down this road.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like,
I
I don't
can
know what
understand.
is like, I'm like, I don't even feel like I'm in this myself. So I'm definitely not encouraging anyone else to be exploring God and faith and all this stuff, because it was so bruising to me
Mm-hmm.
when I went through losing mom and recovering from all of that. It was just like, this has made things so much worse, because it just set up these expectations that just
Mm-hmm.
were dashed in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I genuinely think, like, if I didn't have the tools of doing theology like as a job, I don't know how I would have found my way through to this, because I would have just chucked it all in, because it's so complicated. And we're not told that there's different perspectives on issues. We're just told, as you say, if you leave this church or this denomination, you're not a Christian anymore. Well, no,
Mm-hmm.
actually, because this denomination is about 60 years old, and the church has
Mm-hmm.
existed for a lot longer than that. Christians have existed
Mm-hmm.
for centuries without holding on to these ideas. So
Yeah.
it's a blessing to me to hear you say that. And my hope really is that anybody who has had these similar experiences, that you take your time, be kind to yourself, because I really believe that the process of leaving behind harmful church spaces, there's so much healing that's required. And I don't think
Mm-hmm.
that there's any guidelines or rules on how that healing should come to you. For me,
Mm-hmm.
like, taking a break from church has been essential to my healing, and
Mm-hmm.
not feeling obliged to go or to serve on teams to finding other ways to nurture my spiritual life that don't depend on other people telling me what I should think and feel and believe has been
Yeah.
essential. And I do hope that, and I believe that I will be able to go back into a church space. I think so. I hope so. But something that's not like what I've been in, something a lot more chilled in terms of the setup, and be able to participate in that space as a whole person who can set good boundaries and who can think through what I'm hearing on a Sunday. And that's what I hope for myself, that I can again be part of a community like that. But I have no idea where it's going to come from, so we'll see.
We'll see,
See.
shall we? Yeah.
But Danny, it's been so great. Thank you for sharing so openly about your story and your
Thank you for
experiences.
having me. I was
Um,
sitting here like, did I say anything important? I don't
oh,
know.
you
Sal sounds
did.
amazing right now.
You
She's
said
so
so many
intelligent.
good things. You said so many good things. And I feel like so many people are going to be listening to this saying, yes, 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 this is what I've experienced. And I think you show that there's a way to just to process it, and we're both in the middle of processing in different ways. And so, yeah, I hope that anyone listening will be able to find what they need to be well. That's what I hope. But thank
I
you all for
hope that
listening.
too.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so much, Danny.
everyone. Thanks, Sal. It's been
Oh.
a pleasure.